This is the sound of Trump.
There's a specific sound that great impressionists spend years searching for. Not the voice, not the accent, not the surface characteristics that any decent mimic can replicate after a few hours of practice. The real target is something deeper and more elusive. The rhythm, the internal logic, the specific pattern of thought that determines not just what a person says, but the exact shape of the path their senses take to get there. When you find that, you stop doing an impression. You start doing a portrait. Dana Carvey found it. And what he found, when he pressed his ear close enough to the rhythm of Donald Trump's speech and held it there long enough to understand its architecture, was something that goes considerably beyond comedy. Something that turns a late-night impression segment into a cultural event. Something that makes audiences laugh with the specific quality of laughter that contains recognition underneath it. Not just the laugh of something being funny. The laugh of something being true. Carvey has been doing presidential impressions since the 1980s. His George H.W. Bush became one of the defining cultural artifacts of that era. The 1,000 points of light. The wouldn't be prudent. The specific verbal tics of a patrician politician who had spent so long inside the careful language of diplomacy and governance that his public speech had developed its own distinct musical quality, full of hedged phrases and sudden enthusiasms, and particular rhythm of a man who was never entirely sure whether he was allowed to say the thing he was about to say. Carvey heard that rhythm, mapped it, and then performed it back to the country with such precision that it stopped feeling like imitation and started feeling like something closer to translation. But Bush was a particular kind of challenge. The tics were subtle. The humor lived in the gap between the dignity of the office and the unexpected awkwardness of the man occupying it. Trump presented a different kind of challenge entirely. Not subtle, not hedged, not operating inside any of the traditional frameworks of political speech that give an impressionist something to push against or exaggerate. Trump's speech had already been built for maximum recognizability. It was already operating at the outer edges of what political language was supposed to sound like, and had been doing so consistently and without apology for years before anyone was asked to imitate it, which meant that Carvey's job was not to find the exaggeration. It was to find the thing underneath the exaggeration that made the exaggeration recognizable in the first place. The pattern reveals itself quickly once you know what you're listening for. Short bursts, complete thoughts delivered in fragments, a sentence that begins with confident assertion and then loops back on itself to reassert the same confidence from a slightly different angle. The repetition that does not build toward anything but simply insists on its own validity through sheer volume of occurrence. Great. So great. Going to be great. You have no idea how great. Nobody has ever seen how great this is going to be. Carvey captures this in the first few seconds of any Trump segment he performs. The rhythm locks in immediately. The audience's recognition arrives almost before the words do, because the pattern itself is a signature, not the content. The content shifts from speech to speech, from rally to interview to press conference, but the pattern is constant. The pattern is the voice. And then there is the self-promotion. The way it sneaks into every sentence regardless of the nominal subject. A discussion of foreign policy becomes, within 2 sentences, a discussion of Trump's foreign policy instincts and how no one has ever had better ones. A comment on the economy becomes, within 2 sentences, a reminder that no president has ever produced better economic results and that the people saying otherwise are saying for reasons that reflect poorly on them, not on the numbers. Even a casual observational remark about the weather or the crowd or the quality of the venue becomes, within 2 sentences, a referendum on the specific brilliance of having chosen this weather, this crowd, this venue. Carvey does not exaggerate this pattern. He simply performs it, which is how you know the impression is working, because the exaggeration is already fully present in the original. When Carvey performs the impression live, there is a specific moment that audiences consistently respond to with something more complicated than simple laughter. It comes about 30 seconds in, after the initial burst of recognition has produced the first wave of response, and the room has settled slightly into the rhythm of the performance. It is the moment when Carvey executes one of the pivot sequences, the ones where Trump moves from one subject to another through a logical connection that is not immediately visible and may not exist at all, but is delivered with such complete confidence that the absence of logic goes unremarked for several seconds. Let me tell you, this is going to be great. It is going to be so great. We are going to say a lot of things. Let me tell you that. So many things, like you cannot believe. We are going to say many, many things. The audience laughs at this, but there's a pause inside the laugh. A brief, fractional hesitation that you can hear if you are listening for it. The pause of people who are laughing and simultaneously registering that what they just heard was not invented by the comedian, that they have actually heard it, that it is sitting in their memory in exactly this form from any of 1,000 real speeches and rallies and interviews. That pause is where the impression lives, in the gap between the joke and the recognition, in the moment where the audience realizes that the mirroring is almost exact. Carvey has spoken about this in interviews. The challenge with Trump, he has explained, is not the impression itself. It is managing the audience's response to the accuracy. When an impression is primarily an exaggeration, the audience knows where they stand. The comedian has taken something real and stretched it for effect. They are laughing at the stretch. But when the impression is primarily a mirror, the audience is laughing at the real thing, and they feel the difference even if they cannot immediately articulate it. The handshake energy is one of the most specific and consistently successful elements of Carvey's performance. Trump's handshake became one of the early visual signatures of his political career. The extended reach, the pull, the specific sequence of grip and yank that security experts and body language analysts spent considerable time examining because it communicated something deliberate, a statement about dominance delivered through a social gesture that is supposed to be neutral. Carvey turns it into a piece of physical comedy that goes beyond the handshake itself. He uses it as a gateway into the entire physical vocabulary of performance. The way the confidence is performed through posture, the way the chest comes forward, the way the chin elevates, the way the hands move when Trump is making his most emphatic points, not gesturing to illustrate an idea, but gesturing to assert that the idea is more significant than any idea that has preceded it in the history of ideas. And woven through all of it, the believe me. Carvey has noted that believe me is one of the most structurally interesting phrases in Trump's vocabulary because of when it appears. Not at the beginning of a statement, where it would function as an introduction. Not in the middle, where it would function as emphasis. At the end, after the claim has already been made, where it functions as a request that the audience accept something that was just asserted without evidence, as though the assertion's own confidence is the evidence. Believe me, not because here is the proof, but because I am the one telling you. In Carvey's hands, believe me becomes percussion instrument, a beat that lands at the end of each phrase the way a drummer closes a musical figure. The rhythm of the speech becomes audible as rhythm, independent of the content, and what it reveals is the specific music of a speaker who has built an entire communication style around assertion rather than argument. The Putin material is where the impression sharpens into something that lands differently than pure comedy. When Carvey performs Trump discussing Vladimir Putin, the specific quality of the admiration in the voice becomes the whole point. He said I was brilliant. Okay? Because that is the structure of the exchange as it has existed in real life. A foreign leader offers a compliment. The compliment is received not with diplomatic deflection or the careful language of statecraft, but with genuine, unguarded pleasure and immediate repetition. He said I was brilliant. He said it. A smart guy. A very smart guy. Very smart. Carvey does not add irony to this. He performs it straight, which is a correct choice because the irony is already fully present in the material. A sitting American president responding to flattery from an adversarial foreign leader with the open enthusiasm of someone who has just received an unexpected compliment from someone they admire. The comedy is not in the exaggeration. The comedy is in the accuracy. And underneath the comedy is something that the laughter in the room acknowledges without naming directly, that what is being described is not merely eccentric or amusing, that the quality of the relationship being performed, the specific pleasure that Carvey captures in the voice, the way the flattery lands and sticks and becomes immediately quotable, is something that audiences recognize and are not entirely comfortable recognizing. That is why the Putin impression hits differently than the handshake material or the believe me sequences. Those produce pure laughter. The Putin material produces laughter with something sitting underneath it that is slightly harder to categorize. The many people are saying construction is one of the most durable elements of the impressions vocabulary, and Carvey has used it consistently across years' performances because it never loses its power. Many people are saying is structurally elegant in its simplicity. It allows any claim to be made without a source, without evidence, and without personal accountability. The many people carry the assertion. The speaker is merely reporting. The opinion is not theirs. They are simply passing along information that many people, unspecified in number and identity, have been communicating to them through channels that are also unspecified. Carvey performs this with exactly the combination of authority and studied vagueness that the original construction carries. The authority is in the delivery. The vagueness is in the content. The impression works because the audience understands and has always understood that the many people are the speaker themselves, and that the saying construction is a rhetorical device for stating personal belief while maintaining the appearance of reporting received information. What makes it comedy is the precision. What makes it land with that extra weight is the recognition that this specific rhetorical move has been deployed in real political communication, at real press conferences, in real interviews, and on real policy questions, with the same structure and the same studied vagueness that Carvey is performing as a joke. The question of how Trump has responded to impressions of himself is relevant context for understanding why Carvey's version occupies a particular place in the landscape of political comedy. Past presidents have generally engaged with parody through one of two strategies. Either they acknowledge it with public good humor, making an appearance that demonstrates they are in on the joke and therefore above it, or they ignore it with the confidence of people who have calculated that engagement only amplifies the original. Both strategies carry the same underlying assumption, that the parody is a distortion, that the real version is something different and more dignified than imitation, that the gap between the impression and the original is where the comedy lives. Trump's relationship with impressions has been different because the gap is different. His parodies do not depend on distortion in the way that most political impressions do. They depend on compression, on taking the existing material and presenting it slightly more concentrated than it usually appears, which means that when Trump responds with frustration to an impression, the frustration carries a different quality than when a previous president responded with frustration. It is not the frustration of someone seeing themselves misrepresented. It is the frustration of someone watching themselves presented with uncomfortable accuracy. Carvey has noted this dynamic. The impression, he has explained, works because the original keeps providing new material. Every speech, every rally, every off-the-cuff comment in a hallway with reporters adds fresh phrases and fresh patterns to the vocabulary. The impression does not have to evolve through invention. It evolves by listening. What Carvey has actually accomplished over years of performing this impression is something that takes time to fully appreciate. He has separated the style from the politics. When he performs the impression, he is not making a political argument. He is not saying the specific policy was wrong or the specific decision was bad. He is demonstrating a communication style. The rhythm, the pattern, the specific architecture of sentences built entirely from assertion and self-reference, and the repeated insistence on superlatives that have no referent because they are not describing anything in particular. They are simply the sound of someone who has decided that confidence itself is the message. And by demonstrating the style with political content drained out of it, he makes the style visible in a way that it is not visible when the politics are present. When Trump is speaking at a rally, the audience is engaged with the content, or with the performance of political identity that the content represents. The style is the vehicle, the politics of the cargo. Carvey reverses the relationship. The style becomes the subject. And what the audience discovers when the style is the subject is that they already know it intimately, that it has been present in their ears and their memory for years, and they have cataloged it without realizing they were cataloging it. That is why the recognition arrives so quickly. That is why the first few words of the impression land with such immediate impact. The audience is not learning the rhythm for the first time. They are hearing a rhythm they already know reflected back to them in a context that allows them to hear it clearly for the first time. That is the mirror Carvey builds. Not a distorting mirror. Not a funhouse version. A clear, well-lit mirror held at exactly the right angle. The viral quality of the impression's various performances across years of late-night segments and live shows and clip compilations is not accidental, and it is not simply the result of Carvey's considerable talent as performer. It is a result of the specific relationship between the impression and its source material. Most viral impressions spread because they are funny. Carvey's Trump spreads because it is funny and because it is confirming. People share it not just because it made them laugh, but because watching it produce a specific sensation of recognition that they want other people to experience as well. The sensation of hearing something they have been sensing without being able to articulate. Finally articulated in the form of a comedy segment, in the voice of a man who has been studying presidential speech patterns for 40 years, delivered with the precision of someone who has found the rhythm and locked into it. The online response pattern is consistent. The clip plays. The comment section fills with variations of the same observation in different phrasings. It is too accurate. That is exactly it. This is just what he actually sounds like. The laughter and the recognition arriving together, inseparable from each other. In the end, what Dana Carvey has built over years of performing this impression is not simply a comedy act. It is a cultural document, a recording in the specific medium of performance and parody, of the exact quality of a political voice that defined a decade of American public life. Not the policies, not the events, the voice itself, the rhythm, the pattern, the particular music of a speaker who built an entire political identity out of the sounds of certainty and self-promotion, and a relentless return to the self as the ultimate reference point for every subject under discussion. When historians eventually try to capture not just what happened during this period, but what it felt like, and specifically what it sounded like, Carvey's impression will be part of the archive, not as mockery, as documentation. Because that is the thing about a great impression, the deepest, truest kind. It does not just replicate a voice. It reveals the voice to the people who have been hearing it all along. It makes audible the things that were present but not yet heard. And once you have heard them, you cannot unhear them. That is the uncomfortable power sitting underneath every laugh in every room where Carvey performs this impression. Not the comedy alone, the recognition, the confirmation, the specific sensation of a mirror being held up at exactly the right angle, and finding that you already know the face looking back from it, because you have been looking at it for years.